Thank you.
Now it's very much doing it. Sorry.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the official Community Plan Steering Committee regular meeting. We'll start with our land acknowledgement. An Indigenous scholar, Ronnie Dean Harris, surprised me the other day when he shared that the phrase time immemorial that we hear so often in land acknowledgements doesn't mean what we all assume it means when we say that the land that we occupy has always been someone else's home. Time immemorial is actually a legal term under common law and refers to anything that happened prior to July 6, 1189, which was the day that King Richard I took the throne of England. The term essentially dictates that anything prior to that date is too complicated to factor into and the collective conscience. This is true. It's a bad look when applied to the people who established nations and governance here and elsewhere on Turtle Island 10,000 years earlier, and allows us to easily dismiss their ownership of the land that we occupy. Now, Klalaikwam's official Community Plan Steering Committee joins other local organizations and residents working at both truth and reconciliation. And of course, this committee must also respect the work of including our Indigenous hosts in planning for the community's future. Our challenge is to normalize this inclusion, as well as to consistently check in to ensure that we're not marginalizing anyone for reasons of gender, orientation, race, culture, or religion. We're making progress, but of course we can and will do better. Our municipality exists in the still unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. The municipality and its OCP steering committee are committed to working to support and enhance the relationships and understanding that will be vital to the honest acknowledgement of the past and intentional progress towards a better future. And more of a personal note, this is the first Bowen Municipality public meeting, I believe, since the tragedy at Tumbler Ridge. And as we planned for today's OCP meeting, I kept thinking about how nobody in that community ever imagined they would be faced with the horrors of Tuesday. And we certainly don't imagine what will happen here. The municipality and the OCP-SC send solidarity and love from our community to theirs. Thank the first responders and teachers and everyone who helped, and urge all our community to hold those that they love close. Our first agenda item then is the draft agenda. Does anybody have comments or criticisms or ways to enhance that agenda? Not seeing any of those, we then need a motion to approve that draft agenda. Somebody, everybody, Chris, thank you. Any seconds that? Thank you, Betty. Anyone dare to oppose?
Oh, if only I could vote, I would have done it just for the fun.
Smart ass comment noted. Next up, item 2.1 is the adoption of the draft minutes. Same question. We've had them for a while. Anybody have questions or comments about or clarifications regarding the draft minutes? Seeing none, thank you, Fritz. Again, we have a motion moved by Fritz and seconded by Betty, and that's carried unanimously. Public comments. Do we have any members of the public that wish to comment?
We do have Oliver Zimmerman. I'm just looking in Zoom. Richard, are you also here to make public comment or just as a spectator?
Just as a spectator, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So it's just Oliver.
Okay, I'm stepping back. So Oliver, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you guys again. And apologies for my attire. This is a follow-up. I was here, I don't know, a month or so ago. Basically, I just wanted to clarify, I gave you guys a handout. Just going to very quickly go through the points on this thing. In Vancouver, and I think in Burnaby right now, they are considering stratification of laneway houses, which basically means, you know, there's places in Vancouver that have a laneway house and they can't sell it, they can rent it out. Was originally thought that that was an advantage, that you could, increase the rental opportunities. Bowen Island, we have a similar situation. Myself and many others can build a detached secondary suite, but we can't sell it. We can rent it out. And myself and many other people I know, I would imagine most people can't really afford to build a detached secondary suite for the purpose of renting it out. I don't know, at about $400 a square foot, it would cost about $500,000 to, the arithmetic doesn't make sense. Hence, they don't get built and we can't rent them and we can't sell them. What I was hoping to forward is the notion that any property that is allowed to build a detached secondary suite could apply for stratification of that suite. And crucially, there would have to be a clause that, let's say it's a 1,200 square foot house, that's all you can do. It's like buying a condo. You don't buy a condo in a high rise and go, oh, now I want to build a carport. It's basically a detached condo. And that's exactly what Vancouver's doing. I've been trying to get them to send me a draft of, because they're thinking about all of the legal stuff that ultimately we would have to think about. That's the nuts and bolts of it. I have a paper that I gave you, but I guess the bottom line is that people would possibly be able to buy a small house on a small piece of land with no hope of enlarging that house. So the market value of that property is going to be a lot lower than a typical freehold property. So that should make a dent in the affordable housing problem. The other thing is I've got a lot of friends that are going to move off the island because they're living in a big house that their kids used to live in with them, and now they have to downsize. Vancouver City Council in particular suggested that this is like a pathway to downsizing. You can buy your own laneway house and sell the main house, for example. The final note is that I realize that this in legal terms, if it's all done properly, I would say the nominal density of the island would not change. Like, again, as myself, as an example, I'm allowed to build a detached secondary suite. But I'm not going to because I can't afford it. So in practice, that house won't get built. Nobody will live there. If this law went through, then nominally we're not changing the density, but in fact we are, because people like myself will take advantage. Some of those will get built and more people will live on Bowen Island. So there is ultimately a real density change, though not a nominal one. And on the final note on that, I was thinking that because that makes it a political thing as opposed to just a purely practical thing, I thought maybe if this is contentious, it could be something that could be put on a referendum on the next municipal election. Any questions? I don't have the answers, but do you have any questions?
Obviously, you've been reaching out to other municipalities to see where they're at that process.
Yeah.
And did you get any feedback on their timeline in terms of making a decision or what that process is?
No, and my efforts have been quite limited. I've made about 5 phone calls and apparently I'm in a queue somewhere, but they started this in July 25.
Right.
And they have very flowery language. They presented much better than I can, but the gist of it is exactly the same. They basically it's directed at affordable housing, and they also, they talk about multi-generational living and other stuff like that. I'm less optimistic about that, but so I don't know where they are, but I am in a queue, and I even have like a call number. So as soon as I know, I'll let you guys know what they're thinking.
Yeah, yeah, if you could email us or come back.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's, it's a rat's nest. There's all kinds of I's you have to dot and T's you got to cross, but it's not a novel idea, unfortunately. I love having novel ideas. This isn't one of them, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I love the idea. I think for Bowen Island, the challenge would be, and similar to other municipalities and maybe even more so Vancouver, it's the impact on infrastructure. So having access to electricity, to water, and to extra parking and to all of those extra things. And, usually when you do have a developer, there's an amenity cost whenever you're doing improvements, but in this case, you wouldn't necessarily have that. Anyways, it's just, I guess, food for thought later on.
Just one comment on that comment. I mean, in theory, that challenge is already there, right? Like I said, I'm actually allowed, I could go and submit a building plan and they would approve it. But I would have to prove that my septic can handle it, that I can bring in the power, that I have to prove all those things. I think those conditions would remain in place. And if we got to a place where Bowen was big enough that we're running out of water, which I think we are, we're gonna have to deal with that somehow, maybe a pipeline from North Vancouver. But yes, that's a problem, but it's a problem anyway, I guess is my, yeah.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've got to move on.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. It was very short notice. I hate to run off but
Yeah, no, you got to stay for the rest.
yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, so,
And I'll be in touch. Thanks.
okay. All right, next up then we have Daniel addressing item 4.1 about the principles and vision.
Thank you, David. So we put on the agenda our draft vision and principles. I could put on the screen if that's helpful. And more sort of a way to sort of mark the work that the committee has done in our last few meetings, going over the vision, going over the principles. I'm not really coming from necessarily more, like leading more discussion on it, but saying it seems like we seem to be at a good place. We wanted to have it in one document that was there. And then maybe the committee can look at it as part of the full draft as well, or something to revisit. But at this point, we thought we just wanted to have it in a document that people have. Okay, this is the version.
Yeah, I'm jumping with some comments here. Judy pointed out to me that we're repeating ourselves in the vision, the third sentence, and in the principles in the fourth one. Residents at every stage of life, income level and ability. Do we want to do that repetition?
I think that was my note too when I sort of was reviewing it and looking, okay, we did the vision, we were happy with the vision. We did the principles, we were happy with the principles. And then it's, does the, almost the middle of the vision lays out what's in the principles. Maybe there's another round of working that could happen.
I'm just wondering if under the vision, it could be shorter and then we could add the every stage of life part under the principles would be an easy fix.
So just say our community has
Yeah.
diverse, accessible housing and services, period.
To meet the needs of residents.
To meet the needs of residents.
Done. I don't know. It is funny to repeat it.
They're not always, I'm trying to remember if they always appear together, the vision and the vision. In an OCT, do they?
Yes, with the visions on one page of the principles. Following page.
Yeah.
I think of the vision as sort of a broad and then more detail and principles.
That edit would take that into account.
Yeah. Anyway, that was one question. And the other was under principles, the seventh sentence. I sort of think we were getting tired there, but I don't actually know what it means. And so if I don't know what it means, probably some of the public wouldn't either.
Is that the one that said ensure resilience through environmental stewardship, demand management,
Yeah.
climate adaptation, green infrastructure in both natural systems, and build as asset infrastructure management? I'm reading it just in case Alex is online.
Right.
That was one that Glenn.
Much appreciated, Councillor Morris.
Yeah. So Adam's got his hand up. I can't see other hands yet, but I do remember in the conversation about that, Glenn felt fairly strongly about some of that language. Adam, what have you got?
Thanks, David. I was just gonna suggest for the vision and Betty's comment that like we could just strike that third paragraph or sentence entirely. Like we cover it in the principles. Open to consideration. And then sorry, I missed the part about the asset management one. Do you mind repeating that?
We can repeat it, but I think we should also, for Alex's benefit, go back to that vision statement and speak the sentence that you've referred to, Adam.
Sure. It was our community has diverse, accessible housing and services to meet the needs of residents at every stage of life, income level, and ability. The comment from Betty was that the end of that sentence, every stage of life, income level, and ability is repeated in principle 4, which is almost, it's the exact same. And my suggestion was that like if we want to tighten this up, we could just remove that from the vision statement since it's covered in the principles. And it's also pretty specific, and maybe more appropriate as a principle.
I was thinking if we struck that, the fourth vision statement, we are a resilient community that balances the needs of residents. So it does reflect that it needs, the residents' needs are there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments about that vision principles overlap? So then we should do that. Strike, yeah.
Might want to do that. Or just everybody okay.
Yeah. Well, I think we're not there yet. Jude?
May I suggest that the ability from the vision be incorporated into principles then? The word ability?
Sure. Yeah, I can't see them both.
Like, did you mean into the principle that's provide for diverse, accessible, secure housing? It meets needs of residents at every stage of life. And then we just copy income level and ability with that.
Yeah.
Principle.
Yeah. Judy, that's what you were commenting on, right? Yeah. Sorry, I assumed they were the same. Okay. Any other concerns about that edit? Or input to that edit? Back to you, Jen.
So, and then Betty's comments just on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was looking at number 7, ensure resilience through environmental stewardship, demand management, climate adaptation, green infrastructure in both natural systems and built asset infrastructure management. And I sort of went, okay, can I parse that out? We're saying we want to take care of what we have and we want to prepare for climate change impacts. And what does the rest of it mean? I'm not sure.
Oh, well, build asset infrastructure management means that's taking care of and making sure we're properly managing what we've got.
Yeah.
And the built infrastructure. So that's necessary. That was the one Glenn was really.
Glenn was very
Which part?
strong about the
Right, the
language
last
around built asset infrastructure management.
Yeah.
That's.
Okay, so
that's the
I'm
thing.
fine with that, but then what's demand management?
Our demand on our systems, our water, our demand for.
Well, isn't it the same as built assets or not?
No.
Now, how much water are we pulling out of the ground, for
Well, what
instance?
are built assets?
We win one, right here,
Structure.
Okay, so these are buildings.
or roads.
Pipes.
Oh, there's.
Sounds
Glenn.
like Glenn's with us. There he is.
No, Alice is doing a good job. Allison.
I mean, if everybody else is fine with it,
Yeah.
okay, I just think it's hard to understand.
I'm good with it.
Okay, Glenn, you're good with it? This was important to you last time?
Yeah, I'm totally
Okay.
fine with it still.
Cool.
It sounds like, I think most people seem to be understanding it, so I suggest keeping it.
So then, Daniel, we've made one change to the vision and a slight change to the principles. We seem to have consensus.
We'll make that change. I'll just circulate a new document for you for.
Great. Can we move on to land use designation?
Are we
Oh,
going to forward these to council? With any information?
I mean, we'll get to sort of next, well, I think when we talk about next meetings, we can talk about steps, but council will see the whole draft OCP that'll include these in. I don't know, like unless if you as council rep thinks that council needs to see it in advance of the rest
Well,
of the
I'm
draft.
just thinking, this is sort of the front entrance piece and maybe, I mean, if they take a huge exception to one of these things, then it's not the problem. I think just for information, as an information item in the next agenda or
Let
something.
the OCP steering committee
Yeah.
refer the revised vision and principles to council for
I don't know if
information.
refer or
Just share them.
provides to council for information or something, yeah.
Let's move on then to 4.2 land use designations.
Right, this was on our agenda last time, and it's back again for more discussion. Last time we ran out of time meeting. So this is from McElhaney drafting land use designation. So first they show our existing OCP land use designation. So there's 29 land use designations. And part of their goal has been, where appropriate, consolidate. So they have down below the proposed designations. And then I have in the agenda as well, just some of my initial thoughts on that. I see Betty has a map of the land use, which is very helpful. So I see that one. I don't know how to have them both up, but yeah, and then as we've seen in the draft content that they've shown, that in the OCP, it would essentially, each land use designation would have its own little page that says this is its purpose, these are land uses in here, these are policies specific to this land use. And then the OCP would go into general content areas on general policies. So some policies may be specific to a land use and some would be general, applied across the island. So maybe it's starting at the top. You know, our current OCP has 3 different park designations. So municipal park, urban park, provincial park. It doesn't actually have very many policies that differentiate between the 3. And so they propose collapsing them into one that would say, like, these are things generally we want to happen in parks. And then it gives the potential, like our current OCP has some policies that specifically talk to Crippen Park. Even though they don't talk about the park designation, they just talk about in Crippen or around Crippen Park, and that could continue to exist, that we acknowledge Crippen Park as a place on Bowen that needs certain features, but that's separate than our park designation. And then carrying forward the nature reserve designation that exists. So this in our current OCP is for like the Islands Trust Conservancy nature reserves. And then I think it would be appropriate, this could be expanded to like Bowen Island Conservancy Nature Reserve layouts as well. And potentially Apodaca Ecological Reserve is sort of its nature reserves on Bowen is separate maybe than Parks and Recreation. So I don't know if you want me to, I can pause at each sort of major category.
So passive part disappears. If I'm reading this correctly, it's saying the intent of this, and I'm wondering how this meshes with the Parks Master Plan, which I forgot to. The intent of this land is to provide public park space for active and informal, and to allow indoor and outdoor recreation space. So I thought with the passive park, it was more just, well, maybe that's one where it's just for walking it.
Yeah, I think actually one of the initial comments I provided to them.
Yeah.
Because we didn't get a chance to talk about it last meeting, was just that this would, the purpose would include ecological protection. So
Yeah.
capturing that idea that we could have parks that are just for ecological protection. And then I debated a bit with, like the Parks and Recreation designation name as opposed to just a parks name.
Maybe if it was just municipal parks, then the parks master plan would then say what all those different municipal parks do.
Yeah. Like I think if they just have one designation that's like, these are parks. And parks can range from ecological reserve, or not ecological, but ecological protection to trails. To, you know, some sports fields, we don't have many, some.
Just as a general comment, I do find, you know, compared to other maybe land use designations, land use tend to be more broad and not so specific.
Yeah.
So to your point, like we're being very specific with the park plan as opposed to just labeling it park.
Yeah.
You know, same thing with looking at some of the other designations around, I know we're not there yet, but you know, village residential, village periphery, Snug Grove residential, a lot of these are, you know, what you call mixed use. You would see that in other land use designations with other municipalities. They would just call it mixed use and it's just very broad. So I'm just curious to know, is there a reason why that we're so specific with a lot of those land use designations, or is there a reason behind it?
I guess it's like communities can be, yeah, more specific or more different depending on how much you want to differentiate. So like the previous community I worked in was Kitimat, and they had in their OCP, they had residential and they had commercial, and that was it. And residential was like, this can be single family, this can be multi-unit, this is just where people live. And so in theory, then you could come to rezone any property if you're like, I want to do multifamily development, because the OCP was just like, sure. Whereas Bowen's, yeah, but some of them are much more specific policies for certain areas or certain densities or whatever.
I think it's with municipal parks, you know, if it's passive or it is active, I think that is nice to know that you can't put a building just anywhere in municipal park space. So I think somehow, I mean, if something is going to be developed, fine, but if something is a municipal park, like Crippen Park at the moment, right? Like if you would say from that's just park, then building is kind of, and I think that's not right. You have to make it from you make up your mind what is passive and what is active park. That's the only distinction I think should be there.
Okay. Evan's got his hand up.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think my question is more, or my comment's more for Daniel. Like this, I'm curious, like from your perspective, what this consolidation would mean for like from a staff perspective. Like, does it make your job easier? Would you anticipate fewer OCP amendments? Like, because I mean, for me personally, like, it doesn't really matter if there's 29 or 15. Like, I think this part is more like what the impact would be for you as staff. Like, does it make your life easier?
I mean, so our current OCP has those 3 designations. And then I don't think it has like, it doesn't have any specific policies to provincial park. I don't even know if it necessarily calls out municipal park versus it just talks about park. I think if you look to the policies themselves. So in that sense, we're not differentiating. And I know one of my goals of the OCP is like, it is clear if there's a separate designation, then it's important enough that we have separate policies to say, this is why this deserves its own designation. And in that sense, it seems like RSP doesn't, which like if it's park, we're interested in it being a park. And then we do have, we have separate zoning for municipal parks that are differentiated, and we have parks plan that sort of guides how that works. Oh, in general, Adam, yeah, I think that's just in general. It's like, I would like to have policies for each designation in some way that, and I think it is easier to navigate for people if there are fewer. Like, I don't think that should drive like 100% of decision making. If we're thinking, no, these are separate, then that's more important than just a general concept of like 29 is more than 15. It'd be nicer to be lower.
Make a case for it.
Yeah, yeah.
We have OCP designations for Crown lands or Metro Vancouver lands, right? I mean, they're still there. The OCP designations are over all islands. So for instance, if you take island, like, you can say if we have land that is zone is CP zone, sorry, OCP zoning for conservancy, for conserving, right? And you have it for park, right? But then I still think that if you then zone, for instance, Griffin Park, then you have to put two different zones on that, because that's what the municipality maybe would want. They would necessarily, if you zone it all park, for instance, or if you zone it all environmental, makes a huge difference. Like if it's going to be conserved or if it's going to be active, it's a huge difference. So then, if we have 3 mountains and all 3 mountains are zoned preserved, right? Then that makes sense to me. And other areas that should be preserved should have the same zoning on it, which is preserved. Then the balance is park, right? And in the park, you would distinguish between where you can build and develop and what is intended to not be preserved, but it's active park space. So for instance, I see a big difference between Apalaco Park. Is it really to conserve nature? If you take Crippen Park, it's not really true. It has a fairly highly active use in it. But then if you say, well, we don't agree in the OCP that would be not conservation, but it would be park, then within that park, I would want to see a difference between active and passive.
So you would look for 2 park designations.
Yeah, within park. And then if something is either conserved or it's park. If it's park, it has either an active or passive use. I think that gives enough clarity for. And it doesn't matter if it's municipality or if it's Metro Vancouver or if it's Crown Land. It's no different. So I totally agree with you that it's about writing policy for each step item. Yeah.
Thank you for answering.
I'm not sure if you think Apodaca Park is totally separate from the ecological reserve.
No,
And
I'm just saying is that
Apodaca
the
Park
purpose of the
not
park.
and
would be-
camping on it.
No, but the purpose of the park, at least this far, is preservation. You know, I don't think well, okay, then I'm wrong, fair enough, but the principle stays the same. I'm just saying is the principle reflects what Danielle is saying, that you have, if you write different policies for different areas of land, then there has to be a division. And I think the division is something is either conserved, right? And the mountains are. And then the difference is you have park and flat, and how are you going to use that?
Well, to me, there's active park and preservation park.
Well, I think that it's. I think the main thing is like I think that I think already kind of saying that. But if you look at the conservancy, right, they want certain areas to be conserved, right? That is the main objective. You may have people in it, but only where it's not in the way of conserving. So the main purpose of the park is to conserve, right? And other park is different. It's maybe because everybody can walk, like the whole municipality can walk in it. It's an active park, but it's not conserved. It's not conservancy.
Jim.
Thank you. I think looking at not just the park designations, but the other designations as well, I like where Daniel was going with that, in the sense of why have a separate designation if either the actual use that's allowed in the designation or the policies that would be in the designation are different. So I think that could be broadly applied to everything. And I kind of think I'd like us to sort of at least sort of agree on something like that so that we don't just give our opinion around absolutely every designation, because I think this would be endless. What's your thoughts?
I think you're right. Daniel, what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think we're gonna come to conclusions on some of these today, and this is sort of like initial feedback, and then knowing that we're gonna dive into it in the actual specifics. Like some of these, even as I go through, I have trouble thinking abstractly till I'm like, okay, where does this apply? And then what are the policies that apply to it that may change what it, every time McElhinney asks me advice or something, and I'll say, well, I might change my mind. Like this, but I think looking at, if I look at this table, I may say something. If I see the whole thing, well, I may say something different. Because how it all fits together is important.
I'm just sort of trying to envision what this means. So we're approving a little neighborhood subdivision and there's parkland in it. And to me, people would probably have a different reaction to it's going to be tennis courts and a baseball diamond in the neighborhood versus it's going to be a nicely landscaped park with a few benches and a little waterway running through it. And so do you have ability to control that variation inside of one?
Yeah, like what we would do now in that case is we would designate the park as P municipal park.
Yeah.
Right, that's our current designation. And then we would put it in one of the 4 like zoning categories. So in the land use bylaw, there's P1 to 4. And it doesn't quite correlate with intensity, but broadly, there are different levels of intensity. So we would,
zoning does it.
yeah, in the OCP amendment, it would place it in, right now, it would place it in municipal park. And in this proposal, it would place it in parks and recreation. And then the zoning would say, and it's in a P2 zone, and that allows whatever it allows.
And the Parks Master Plan takes it one step further.
Yeah, and then the Parks Master Plan for our existing parks outlines, like this is what should be in these parks.
Okay, so I'm fine with that then.
Makes sense. Not seeing any other questions. Do you want to move on to discuss other
Sure.
designations?
Yeah. So next one being institutional. And this is just noting on the side that we have currently institutional uses that also have a bunch of sort of split designation properties, primarily like where we are now, I think is institutional / village commercial / village residential maybe, and maybe where the health center is and the fire hall and the lookout affordable housing is proposed is like institutional / it's one of the slashes. And so trying to consolidate into an institutional, and then the comments from McElhinney are this idea that the institutional designation could include permissions for either it's like your limited community serving commercial uses, and then provision for it here. It's talking about rental housing under a housing agreement or affordable housing. So I'm now trying to say, okay, well, institutional is things like Vix is institutional, Camp Belial is institutional, whatever else is institutional zone. The community center is institutional. But then there's provisions that within the institutional use, the fire hall is institutional. There could be provisions for limited commercial uses as accessory to that, or there could be potential for housing as accessory to that. So like I know our fire hall didn't, but we've seen other examples of fire halls or libraries that are developed with housing as a component of it. And so having that balance as well.
Yeah, and again, I'm just sort of curious, again, these very specific breakdowns, and then some are, it's institutional on its own is fine, but I just kind of see how institutional is wrapped in with other designations, and instead of calling it a mixed use, and mixed use just being a variety of different things. Just trying to understand what is the value of then combining institutional with other and like actually spelling out other zoning requirements.
Are you looking at the one with the blue designation? Yeah. So the description there.
Yes, but I'm also looking here. So we see institutional.
Chris, sorry to jump in, just point of access here. What are we collapsing it down from the current list, just so I can better participate in this discussion?
So, in the doc, yeah, so it lists, so the I designation consolidates. And here's what's in service commercial, and then institutional / village residential, institutional / village commercial, and institutional / village residential / village commercial would be consolidated into the single institutional designation.
Alex, you had your hand up. Was it for that or is there more?
No, it was for that, but the conversation was just progressing at such a pace that I felt like I had to ask or get lost in the conversation.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I wanted to get to you and wasn't sure the nature of the question. Thank you.
No worries. There's not like there's a totally different hand sign I can make by putting up my hand differently.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just ask, so an example of IVRBC is the community center, is that an example of IVRBC?
Yeah, I mean, the examples of those slashes are either like this lot of the community lands or lot 3 of the community lands where the fire hall and the health center are. And I don't remember the breakdown of those 3 different.
But that's where those
slashes, but
IVRBC.
that's where those are. Yeah.
That's only talking about those 2, so they would take those 2, which are very institutional.
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah, so it's not like there's privately owned, and the health center, I guess, is privately owned.
But that, okay, fair enough, okay.
That's what we're not talking, it's not like large amounts of Snug Cove have this, that would then become institutional, but yeah.
Well, I think based on the description in institutional, and I'm happy for that.
Alex?
I assume, as is done in parts of the land use bylaw currently, that if there's things that apply to specific properties, you go and drop into institutional A, B, C, and so forth. Is that correct, Daniel?
If necessary, that's what would happen, or the policy could just, it could all be land use designation, institutional, and then the policy would say, you know, Bowen Island Community School is whatever it may be, you know, the Bowen Island Community Center, blah, 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 and describe it that way rather than like a different designation. It could be called out in a policy.
Fritz? Sorry, Kirsten was ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. So just so I'm clear, when we refer to village, is it always here in Snug, or say there's going to be another, like we think of like Seymour Bay and, you know, or where potentially that's a development that will be mixed use that would potentially have an institutional association with it. So when we actually spell out that it's village, is this a definition of village that's beyond Snug Cove, or do we specifically mean Snug Cove?
That's a great question. I think everywhere that it's referred to in the designations, it's referring to the Snug Cove village. But there is, because I was going through the Cowan Point policies specifically, and there's language in there about Seymour Bay as a village. But that's kind of the only reference. But you're right, it's something that is, the assumption is always that it's Snug Cove village.
Like just as an overarching comment, for those who speak French, there's an expression in France where, you know, pourquoi faire le simple qu'on peut le faire compliqué? Like, why do it simple when we can make it so much more complex? and to be honest, I'm just with my experience dealing with other land use authorities and other designations that are, you know, far more complex than Bowen Island. I just seemed that we're being so specific and we're drilling down to such details. I kind of question, do we really need to do that? If we're really looking for a long-term vision and we're looking at these designations, do we not want to be a little bit more broader? And be our guideline be, how would we then, again, looking at all these breakdowns, you know, instead of calling it mixed use, we're being very specific, for example, but probably a lot of the policies that you would be creating and the developments that you'd be looking at, you know, how much would they really change between the different designations that we have listed here? So that's just kind of my overarching comment. I think there's some opportunities to make it even broader and simpler, and that may be to our advantage as we look to the future. If I could just, sorry, one more thing. Like another example is that was a ferry terminal. well, maybe we should be looking at transportation hub instead. Obviously, the ferry terminal is a transportation hub, but maybe in the future, if we do have a passenger ferry at Seymour Bay, that would be another transportation hub. And I think that's the purpose of land use designations, is to just very broadly identify areas and not to be so specific. Now,
Great.
Yeah, I just wonder, because there's more and more kind of innovative development proposals. And Bowen Island has endless comprehensive development zones, right? 20 to really take care of unique developments. And so the idea that something is mixed, like, you know, that you have a school and you have a tower above it, which they do in Vancouver, right? It's all over the place now. Then how do you accommodate that? Like if you have the OCP that has certain areas, right? Now there is potential for bringing these things together in more comprehensive developments, which is happening everywhere. And Bowen has used that vehicle for everything that cannot be catched into, you know, more traditional zoning, so to speak, right? So to keep that open, it's kind of similar to what you're saying, is that if there's potential for things to happen, how do you accommodate that without restricting it, right? But on the other hand, you still want to prevent some things that the community absolutely doesn't want, you know what I mean? To give the community comfort. It is not like totally open.
Not seeing anything
Yeah,
else.
I'd like an answer on that actually
Okay.
from Danielle. Like, how do you see that? Like, there's this comprehensive developments, and you know, the things that come forward that are more complex that have to be accommodated. Maybe mixed use that we're not used to, but that would be really beneficial. Is it then just, you say in the zoning, you just make it and like in the application, makes it an comprehensive development, like it would be zoned to comprehensive development to allow that to happen, because the existing zoning doesn't, the zoning doesn't. Is that an active tool? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Right, I mean, there's two, so one's the OCP designation is separate from the land use bylaw zoning. But yeah, so I think it's a question for the committee, I guess, is like, what's the desire to have more general land use designations that are more encompassing, right, of more potential, versus more concerned about more specificity in them to sort of provide people certainty in terms of what is proposed in that designation. That's sort of an internal question. And that's same with the parks. Do you want a parks designation, or do you want to delve into it and separate it out? So these are parks that are more appropriate and more designated for more active use as opposed to more passive use. Similar with sort of all the land uses, the idea of how specific do you want to be. And I don't think there's a quote like right answer, because it depends what your outcome is trying to be.
So obviously, I think we should just go broad. I think in the end, it would serve us better when we look to the future, and to Fritz's point, in terms of the innovation and the change that we may be seeing in the future. We don't want the land use designation to really restrict us. It should be it's a general overview, but it's not really meant also to drill down into too many details anyways.
We are significantly behind time. No.
Okay, I think if I may, I'll move on to residential, see how we can do here. And I'll say this is the one where I think we gave the most significant feedback to the consultants, because I think I just fundamentally agree with the consolidation and the designations. So in essence, in their designations, they have rural residential as coming over from the rural reserve designation. And then rural residential transition being a consolidation of the rural and the R1 rural one, is sort of their initial take. And in my review, I said essentially the rural reserve currently is the significant crown land blocks on Bowman. So it's Mount Gardner, Mount Collins, Mount Apodaca, Radar Hill. And so this is not appropriate. This is not what we designate as rural residential. This is not where we're looking for hobby farms and home-based businesses. This is, so I think in their revision would come a change to instead go back to having a rural reserve designation for that crown land policies, which maybe is still called rural reserve, maybe it's called something different for crown lands. And then having a rural residential that matches our rural and a rural residential transition essentially is the R1 rural one designation. So adding a layer there to break it out. And that was just my big flag, was like that the rural reserve is not, it's not the same as the rural residential. When we think about Mount Gardner, we're not thinking like, oh, rural development, not development. It's a mountain.
I thought we bring crown land into parks, into the, what, no?
Crown land shouldn't be residential.
So currently in our current OCP, for this one,
If I recall from when we did, we can't downzone it like that. It's only the province that could make it a park.
But
Yeah.
when we had this when we were talking about the park test, didn't you not say crown land?
so I think the one that we would look to move, or at least in my initial, is the so this is just showing Schedule C of our current OCP, and you can see like Mount Gardner and Apodaca as this rural reserve designation, Radar Hill rural reserve. So potentially like Apodaca becomes nature reserve as an ecological
Put in
reserve.
what airlines? Like, really? How about all of them?
Sorry, Jim, you're in.
It's more of a terminal too. I don't know. I know, but it's probably like this.
Jim, can you?
I've done it. It's okay.
Yeah, and then so otherwise, I think when we look at the map, maybe but currently these are the rural reserve designation.
Okay, so it's only the dedicated park bits of the crown lands, Apodaca Park, that would go into the,
nature reserve designation.
okay. And then the rest of it, the rest of crown land,
Yeah.
they're suggesting goes into residential.
Yeah, I mean, in their table, they had it as rural residential. That's why I said no. As a starting point, we would just leave it as the rural reserve. That it wouldn't have the policies around like agriculture use or commercial use. It would instead be talking about ecological protection and watersheds and that type of policy. So that was the big change that I was flagging. It's not.
Can you show the difference in zoning between the three? Because I think they're zoned differently.
In our land use bylaw?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's an index, you can read it, and it's different because it implies that they actually have a different use.
Well, G1 is the ecological reserve,
Yeah, sure.
and the other two are the same, G3.
Natural areas.
Well, they describe it differently. There's somewhere you can read what G1, G2, and G3 actually mean. See on the very lower right there, the little green box there?
Yeah, that's what I think Allison says G1, like this is G1 ecological reserve.
Yeah, but if you read
And
G2
G3
and
is natural
G3,
areas / watershed. And G1 is ecological reserve, and G2 is environmentally sensitive.
yeah, so they're not the same, but
No.
one of them says watershed, which is kind of a bit strange, you know what I mean? Like, it isn't, it seems to be somewhat random, let's put it that way.
Oh,
It's not a watershed.
Mount Gardner is
It's
a
not.
watershed.
Well, no,
It's the watershed for Grafton Lake.
no, the watershed from Grafton Lake is the watershed from Grafton Lake, which is everything that goes to, it's not the mountain. It's
Oh,
the
it's
part of the mountain that goes towards the lake. So the watersheds are completely different than calling a whole mountain a watershed.
Well, it's kind of, I mean, so this is the land use bylaw, so maybe we don't need to spend
Yeah.
time on it, but it's natural area /
So Apodaca Park, you can't call it nature reserve because they've got active tenting in there. They put 10 campgrounds. 10
Sorry,
sites.
that's the provincial park. That's
Yeah.
different from. So provincial park is Apodaca Provincial Park,
Yeah.
Okay, got
and
you.
then Apodaca Mountain Ecological Reserve.
Oh, Apodaca Mountain.
Okay, what was the last map you showed us? When that was,
The
when
land
it's
use
G,
bylaw.
Land use bylaw. So
that
this
was
is,
just
yeah,
G, that was G, what was it?
G1, the Apodaca Ecological Reserve is zoned G1 and it's designated rural reserve.
Okay, but that for G1 is now, according to this, is gonna go into,
Okay, now this was just an example, okay, that the zoning is not the same for the mountains, and it seems to be somewhat. You can't figure out why, okay? But in the OCP, they're the same. And if, for instance, if we would all of them to be environmentally protected areas, then that's what it should say in the OCP. This is what the community wants. If the community wants it to be all logging, we say it's still a way, it has to represent what the community wants. That's what the official community plan is for. It is not acknowledging that maybe it all gets cut and all gets logged. That's not what we want. So it has to be really simple. All three of them, should show what the community wants. If we cannot distinguish between these three mountains.
I mean,
Well, it's just provincial land at the end of the day.
Hang on, not everybody at once. Daniel?
I was gonna say, I mean, I think like the zoning is reflecting the difference in status between the different areas of Crown land. And Apodaca is a provincial ecological reserve.
Well, is it legally?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It is a provincial ecological reserve.
Not a
Hence-
park.
That's why it is zoned differently as ecological reserve.
To come back to the same thing, the OCP should show what the community wants it to be. So what do we want?
So I think, yeah, just coming back to this table, so hence our feedback to them of having a separate rural reserve designation that would then outline those Crown land policies would fit within that. So if it is, support for non-motorized trails as opposed to motorized trails in the rural reserve. If it's support for ecological protection, watershed protection.
Yeah.
Those are the policies that I would see fitting within the rural reserve designation. And then essentially you can almost misalign this and you skew it. So what it's talking about here in the rural residential would transfer over to our rural current designation. And the rural residential transition would be the R1 rural. And we just added a level on top. So I think this would make sense when we'll get a revised version. It'll make more sense to talk through, but I'm sort of flagging that as that was the main misalignment.
so you want to add under residential rural reserve?
Yeah.
To capture the Crown lands? Okay.
Keep going.
All right, I'll keep going. Neighborhood residential.
Wait,
there.
wait, hold on, sorry, but this is where I get confused.
Okay.
Apodaca Park, right? Where would that then fall under rural reserve under residential, or is that gonna go to parks?
That is
Under
a
Parks and Rec.
provincial declared park.
So that goes
A
at,
little bit is down on the water.
okay, so how that
Oh,
was,
sorry. I think Melanie's talking about like Apodaca, Crown land and not the provincial.
so we got two, so the provincial park within Crown, within Apodaca, no, it's not.
No.
No, it's
So-
not, so the
Like
provincial
this
park.
PP is a
Yeah.
provincial park,
Park.
Apodaca provincial
To
park.
park, okay, and that's separate now to Apodaca.
Yeah.
Crown land.
Yeah.
So that PP would go to the parks,
Yeah.
park, and then Apodaca G1 would stay in rural reserve. Under
Or,
rec-
yeah, I mean, that's the one
under-
that I'm open, like if when we're looking at land use map, that maybe is more appropriate to be nature reserve.
Yeah.
Given its ecological reserve status.
Okay, so that larger chunk,
This one, yeah.
yeah, you're saying you're gonna take that out of, that would totally change because
Yeah.
it has some sort of conservative,
Mhm.
conservation status
Yeah.
from at the provincial level.
Yeah.
So that part would go to park. reserve,
nature
the nature reserve.
Yeah.
Whereas the other two crown lands would stay in residential under rural reserve.
rural reserve, and then would have, and then would have those crown land policies put in, so that when its purpose is.
So where do you want to put these? You want to put these,
Well, so I think it's that simple, that the OCP has to recognize what the community wants.
but where would you put these two then?
Well,
But I think that's land use bylaw stuff, right? That we're talking about the overall categories, not necessarily what each piece of land, not which category they'll go under.
But we
We've
don't
got
have a, but you're arguing we don't have a bucket for those two.
well, because, you know, if you go through all the comments, right, from the public process, and there's lots of people that are worried about the crown lands. They
Yeah.
want the crown lands to be preserved. They don't want to be logged, they don't want to be mined. So I think we should recognize that in the OCP.
I don't think the
In the-
OCP can change designation. It can.
No, it can. It's like the OCP, OCPs are, how do I say that? OCPs many times don't get fully implemented. Like everybody thinks the OCP becomes a zoning bylaw, but in most places it's like that at all. The OCP is where you want to go. And then council normally, bit by bit, rezones things. But I don't think you can look at the OCP and the zoning to be in the same. The OCP is where you want to go. And zoning is the decisions that you make later. Or you can do it right away, but they did it in Gibson, which is unbelievable. Never seen it before.
Okay, you're arguing.
I was just gonna say, so to sum up essentially, Fritz, you would say, okay, we're gonna keep the crown land, maybe other than the ecological reserve, but the remaining crown lands, rather than staying in something called rural reserve, we should instead have a designation that's
Nature reserve, yeah.
or green space or something.
I would call it nature reserve. But then if people are asking, well, what do they want it to be? They say they want it to be preserved. So
So
it's
you're
what it is.
arguing that you can put you can change its designation even though it's not currently zoned.
I think you have to look at an OCP a little bit different. I mean, so it's a vehicle to make council aware of what the community wants. That's the idea, that it gives us
It's a vision.
goal, a vision to work to. You see what I mean?
I can jump in?
Kristen,
So something to keep in mind too. So if we say then this is rural reserve, that's what we're talking about, the crown land. If in the future we need more residential land, in which we could, buy a portion of that land from the province, is the OCP then restricting our ability to then develop that land? Because we've already said that our vision of that is reserve.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Like as opposed to just saying it's provincial land. Like it's provincial crown land and we're not necessarily tying to it that it's a nature reserve or it's a green space reserve. It's just provincial land. And I'm just flagging this because in 20 years, maybe, above Arbutus Ridge, there wants to be an extension and then going into that crown land. Yeah.
That would be where I believe an OCP amendment would come in.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just saying for now, is this really where, I guess it's just the conversation of however we designate it, are we going to add a layer of protection to it or not? I think just identifying it as crown land, as provincial land, that's just what you're saying what it is and not necessarily saying it's an area to preserve or it's an area to.
I don't get that because crown land, it's all logging claims and mining claims. That's all it is. The whole freaking mountain, all claims, right? And the moment one truck will go over, the whole municipality will say we don't want logging on our islands and all that, or clear cut. That's what they can do now. So that's not what we want. So I think that's just not right. You have to describe what you want it to be. And I would set the bar high. I would say we want it to be a nature reserve. And then if you want to change the OCP designation, I rather change it from nature reserve to housing than from crown land. Because the way the province looks at their land is completely different than the municipality does.
So we're deep into specifics about how these designations can be used. Does the framework that Daniel's talking about allow for the sort of decisions that we're discussing, in your opinion, Chris? Like, do you see, do you want to change to the designations to make that possible?
I think that we have the designations. It's now, the consultant wants to put the Crown lands into rural residential. Daniel's suggesting that we have rural reserve under residential. But there's a bolder step, which Fritz is proposing, is that you put the Crown lands under adult and take it out of residential and you put it under parks as a nature reserve to be able to reflect. And I would agree, there's a pretty strong opinion on Bowen that no logging should happen on that. So I think it is a different take on how do you put that conversation back into the control of the community. So I think it's worth pursuing, to be honest with you. If I understand that correctly.
Sorry, Betty and Alex were indicating.
I'm just thinking that I think you've told us quite a few times, Daniel, that we've identified enough potential building sites for our projected timeline already, right?
For the 20-year timeline.
Yeah. So I don't think that we have a need or responsibility to go beyond 20 years and suggest that we're going to need Mount Gardner for housing. I think it's okay to say, I think people in the community, even if you talk about motorized vehicles, they go, wait, no. So I think saying that we want it to be some kind of nature reserve is absolutely, and I think if we don't do that, we're going to get the feedback and public consultation anyway.
I mean, I'll start jumping the queue. I could suggest too, it's like, there's I guess the option of having it as, designation in this section, Parks and Recreation Nature Reserve, and then third one that is more like natural areas or green space or something to that effect, that is saying, well, there's difference between like the nature reserve that the Conservancy owns and operates, right? That's different than Mount Gardner.
Yeah.
It's like different in many ways. But essentially those Crown land policies we're talking about and the Crown lands themselves, the designation could be, whatever it be. And I can look at other places and say, okay, what are they designating their Crown lands that are similarly slated for no development and no resource extraction? It's like, what's that sort of default? It's natural areas.
Chris, you wanted to say something?
Well, and just to highlight too, that any use on provincial land is a provincial permit following the provincial process, working with Frank Counter, like we, from a jurisdictional point of view, we can't supersede the province.
It's symbolic.
Yeah, exactly. So just to highlight that we don't really have any real authority.
But I just want to play devil's advocate here. If, for example, you put the Crown lands as a protected area under parks and in the OCP, and it was embedded in the OCP, and if that was, is that allowed? Or you don't know, Daniel?
I think, that's sort of a legal review. Like often my position when dealing with Crown land is I'll state like what our bylaws are and what they are. And the province, the person from the province will then work to comply with our bylaws. Whether or not they have to.
I'm not saying they have to,
Yeah.
but does it give it a better, then they say, they said they did want to do logging, can you come back with the OCP and says, well, the OCP it says,
you could
I
come
know
back
it
and
can't,
say that.
it can't say, it can't stop it, but does that sort of show more community intention?
Excuse me.
And this is where, do we want to create confusion or not, right? Because like, as far as I understand, you don't really have the authority. You can't.
I know, I know we don't have the authority,
Yeah.
but does it create a Just trying to speak to your point, does it show the vision?
Okay, but
Which may confuse people, is all I'm saying.
well, no, I don't think so, because what you just said about Crown Land, Apodaca Park was Crown Land. And somehow now, apparently, it is recognized legally as environmental protected area, which means that Crown Land, yes, if there's enough pressure from the community behind it, can get a different provincial designation, because I guess Apodaca Park got that. And it's huge.
Right,
Right? It's a mountain. I mean, the whole mountain, that's what I mean. Apodaca Mountain. So why wouldn't we give the same designation to the other mountains? At least giving the opportunity that those two can also become provincial natural reserves. I mean, to me, it's like a no-brainer. And I mean,
Are we able to come back to this and move on? But can you provide more information whether can you be bold like that?
Can this be bold?
Well, I'm saying then we should also, just just fun, we should designate something for a pool. Oh, community pool.
That's institutional.
Yeah, but you could put a park, you could put a pool, and then they can supersede what the stuff, that's how they put.
We've got to move on.
Okay, that's why I was saying that, can we cut that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. David is ready. So
It's not me, it's the clock.
yeah, so I might try to go high level through. Nothing. Yeah.
Try being.
Yeah. So consolidating some of the land uses within Snug Cove, so Village Residential, Keats Hill Residential, Belterra, separate, and then holding. And this is sort of a discussion goal maybe in the future. So Snug Cove Residential, and this, I don't think they fully captured correctly what this is. So this is essentially Snug Cove Residential, essentially a Snug Point area, which in our current OCP is distinguished from other Snug Cove Village residential areas. It says it's only for single family use as opposed to other areas in Snug Cove which recognize duplexes and multiplexes. So some of my feedback was if our neighborhood residential is essentially most residential areas in Bowen would be this neighborhood residential. So like Deep Bay residential, the Seven Hills or Tunstall Bay, all those sort of areas. Potentially Snug Cove Point would either be appropriate in village residential for denser housing, or it's appropriate in neighborhood residential to say it's more like Deep Bay. That's the type, rather than having its own area. And I'm just going to blow through though. Neighborhood commercial. So we currently have one lot that's designated as service commercial, which is the lot designated for gas station that has a temporary use permit on your way out of here. So we talk about having like a neighborhood commercial designation, and part of the goal for that is that that designation could have policies that say, like, to become a neighborhood commercial designation, you'd want to do these things, and then that could be an appropriate designation if somebody is outside of Snug Cove and wants to open a commercial business. There's kind of no designation for that. So somebody says, "Oh, I actually want to run a restaurant out of my lot. This has always been my dream." Whatever. Right now, we'd sort of say, well, I don't know, we're going to make something up. And this could say, well, if you want to do something like that, here are 6 things that council should be. And village commercial and artisan commercial essentially are carrying forward the existing designations. I mean, maybe in light of our conversation about how general versus broad do you want to be, it's like, well, village commercial, is that this distinct from artisan commercial, which is Artisan Square? Or do you think they're actually, maybe there's overlap there? Could be combined. So planting the seed. Retreat commercial is merging 2 designations we have that are retreat commercial and tourist commercial. And essentially saying that these are ones that are appropriate for visitor accommodations and for retreats. So Xenia is in retreat commercial. Nectar Yoga is in retreat commercial. We have one property that's tourist commercial that actually operates as accommodation for the Retreat Recovery Center. As what the actual use of that property is. And currently our retreat commercial designation, we want to still have these policies, or essentially policies that say, so you want to run a retreat, here are things council should consider in your rezoning. It's probably our most common rezoning inquiry from people, essentially like, I want to run a retreat on Bowen, which I do. So having those sort of policies is helpful, like council will be considering, these are things council will consider if you want to do that designation.
What I don't understand is that these are land use designations. So if you have a land use map, you actually has to define where it is. But if you look at just normal residential zone, and people have some initiatives, right? You cannot catch that in giving land a specific designation. That should probably be done with policy, because if you would want something to happen in an existing neighborhood, then you either have to pick a piece of land where it has to happen, which you would give it that color. But is that clear? I mean, how is that done? Like, we maybe know one or two places where it possibly could be done. But if you say, well, neighborhoods should be able to come forward with an idea, and then in a policy you say, oh yeah, that can be accommodated. But it's different. That means that there is potential within a residential zone. It's different than taking a specific piece of land and saying that is where it's going to be. Because that's what we would have to do, but that restricts it to those pieces of land that would be designated now.
So I think just in response, again, the land use designation map would designate places that are retreat commercial. And currently the default would be that would be the places that are currently retreat commercial or tourist commercial.
Existing
as retreat commercial. So it's open for like an OCP steering committee to say, and we think actually this would be a great location for another retreat commercial. Somebody's property and change their land use designation. I don't think that we necessarily have that direction and that knowledge, but instead it would be saying like, okay, we see that, if the OCP says, we see potential for people wanting to be placed into the retreat commercial designation, they would apply to council, they would do an OCP amendment.
Yes.
But the OCP itself then is providing guidance for council to say, when somebody comes with this application, you want to think about these things. And that's what I'm suggesting.
Sorry, Dan. Good.
This is sort of both a question and a comment. Going backwards to the residential zones, I actually think I contributed to this and I disagree with it. So under rural residential transition and neighborhood residential, I think what we're trying to accomplish with properties that are currently ours and maybe R1s as well is to keep the properties as large as possible and get them to come to the planning department to work out a comprehensive development plan rather than the sort of Cape Roger Curtis thing where they just chopped it up into, I'm allowed to do 2-acre lots. So the whole thing's like Department of Highways lots, and there's no pocket neighborhoods or conservation development. So I sort of got caught on that residential neighborhood. I thought it should be as big as possible, not to make them smaller. And the question in that is then if a developer came with a development proposal for a new neighborhood, could it include commercial uses like, I don't know, a school, a little cafe, or a shared kitchen or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, what
Mixed use.
they've drafted in this neighborhood residential, actually, yeah, as a flag is like idea that commercial uses may be supported in the form of neighborhood serving uses. And that was sort of how they described the neighborhood residential, that like maybe there's potential for commercial within those residential areas.
Okay.
And that would need, like the policy would be there in terms of this language. And then if somebody wanted to do that, well, that would be part of a reviewing application, but it would say, well, there is, support in the OCP for potential for that to be.
Give some somewhere to go.
Yeah.
So my comment then, if we do that, which I think really speaks to what Fritz was talking about, then under residential 2, your comment that this could potentially create more areas being designated for 5 acre lots rather than 10, right? I don't think we want to do that. I think we want to keep them as large as possible, which would mean that we don't collapse them that way.
Yeah, and that was my feedback as well, was that
Okay.
they are not collapsed. but
Okay.
They are separate. But I think the places that are currently designated for 4-hectare lot and acre lots versus 5-acre are distinct enough. I didn't want to collapse them. I wanted to
Okay,
stay
thank you.
Separate. Okay. Marine commercial essentially are the areas of marinas. No changes proposed. Industrial, no changes are proposed other than I proposed changes to their description. So essentially highlighting like the areas designated industrial currently are essentially gravel extraction areas. The building center, things like the bird, like transfer station, recycling depot, works yards, and that the language should better describe those uses. And then ferry terminal, which they say here is a new, but I think it exists in our RCPs.
We've got an FTD in the
Yeah.
RCP right now. It's not.
And why have ferry and marine commercial? Like,
Yeah, wait. That's a good question, like in terms of transportation uses. And then I think too as well, taking Kirsten's comment about maybe we're removing the language about Snug Cove and ferry vessels, and it's about transportation vessels to and from Bowen Island, and Seymour Bay could be appropriate for that as well.
Or, I mean, wanted to expand it even like transportation hubs, like if you think of where the bus system is going and maybe there's like outside of the library where the buses all line up as another transportation hub. Maybe there would be another one, on your way to the golf course.
Right.
9-car parking lots.
And again, just building on the idea that maybe certain areas are simply mixed use. Rather than being very specific as to what it includes. Whether it's good.
So we got to the end of land use designations, which means it must be 3:30. Next on the agenda is development permit areas. Back to you, Ben.
So what's on the agenda are documents shared to us by Betty about example development permit and information on development permit area in Galiano, and then a document on tree protection bylaws in British Columbia. I think triggering discussion about like what tree protection bylaws or regulations exist on Bowen. So I think almost it's like Galiano has a development permit area for tree cutting, and it almost by way of context. So the Local Government Act outlines what development permits can and can't do, and the Community Charter outlines powers of a municipality. So as a municipality, I would say like Bowen Island has the power to have a tree protection bylaw, and the other islands, the Islands Trust, do not, because they're not municipalities. So I think the Galiano tree cutting and removal development permit area is in a sense like kind of backdoor what they could do by a bylaw. On Bowen, so we have in terms of current regulations, so we have a watershed stream protection enhancement area that regulates tree cutting without a development permit. So it requires like an environmental assessment that it doesn't create a negative impact on the watersheds. And then you would generally be prohibited from clearing within a certain area of the fish-bearing stream. And we have a site alteration bylaw that regulates site alteration. So it regulates like grade disturbance, depositing soil, removal of soil. And it regulates the creation of exposed soil, which is removing trees, but like removing all the vegetation of an area over a certain threshold. So you're not prohibited from cutting down trees, but you'd be prohibited from cutting down trees and removing stumps and clearing land above a certain threshold. Yeah.
I think what what I was thinking about is I don't like to call it tree cutting. I'd like to call it forest retention. And it's about tree cover, it's about hydrology, it's about biodiversity. And if you can envision, for example, King Edward Bay versus Evergreen 2 and 3. King Edward Bay is nicely treed. They took some trees out, but it still feels like a foresty neighborhood. And Evergreen 2 and 3 are strip mined. And the people that bought houses there are going to die before they actually have trees again. I mean, it's very difficult. And so I just think that by not having a little more context, that we're allowing something to happen that we shouldn't. And I think that, you know, we could ask for a logging plan. We could ask our developers to demonstrate the need for taking the trees out. Be aware of the hydrological implications of it, that sort of thing. So I don't feel like we're where we need to be right now.
And then, so I think I would suggest, you know, a couple of things. So one is like an OCP could, like an OCP can't, I guess by itself sort of regulate activity on private land, but it could either, you know, point towards consideration for municipality for a tree protection bylaw or a tree retention bylaw, you know, and it could go into more detail for that. It could say, you know, that would prevent the wholesale clearing of a property or something. So almost being clear, it's not talking about individual trees, but it's talking about that element. Or like our 2011 OCP included an environmentally sensitive development permit area. And it designated the development permit area, it mapped the development permit area. And like all of our development permits in our OCP, it then said guidelines would be adopted in the land use bylaw. The guidelines have never been adopted in our land use bylaw, but again, it could be, you know, part of, I think, the discussion of an updated OCP is looking at that list and saying, do we want to, you know, but we still think there should be one. So we're going to update the mapping, because I think the mapping, the original one based on provincial mapping, there's updated provincial mapping, and on the Conservancy has mapping as well. So there's potential for updated, more nuanced, environmentally sensitive areas developed, and then development within those areas that are identified as sensitive, environmentally sensitive areas would have to follow guidelines. And it gives ability to have nuanced guidelines based on what type of sensitive area it is, right? So if you're developing along the coastline, well, there's different guidelines than if you're in a mature forest than if you're in whatever area.
Allison, Adam, Betty.
So we also have to consider fire smart.
We do have to consider fire smart, but we also have to consider blowdown. So what happened along Grafton Lake there that cost community crews days and days and days to clean up is an example of developer clear cutting that we would like to avoid, and they didn't need to do that for fire smart, I don't think.
No, but I'm talking about individual homeowners.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, you would have to exempt that.
Yeah, I'm not arguing so much the fine tuning as sort of the big picture clear cutting to do development.
So maybe we need to upgrade so removal bylaw or
Site alteration.
site alteration.
We skipped that.
Thanks, David. Daniel actually just kind of addressed what I was going to say about updating the environmentally sensitive stuff. I'm just thinking about all those maps that we saw that the Conservancy presented. The biodiversity, and then also the environmental sensitive areas. The one thing we haven't talked about since then was the freshwater recharge map. And wondering if that would just be a separate development permit area, Daniel, or if that would be like looped. Like there was a lot of overlap between those three maps, and I'm just wondering, like, do they need to be parsed apart, or can we accomplish the same thing by having those different layers in the same map, perhaps?
Yeah, like I was interested looking at Gibson's updated OCP. So like we have designated a watershed, streamside, essentially streams and creeks and watershed and water quality development permit area. And then we've designated an environmentally sensitive development permit area. And Gibson's in their updated OCP has one, it's environmentally sensitive areas, and sensitive areas include streams and stream side and watersheds. And, you know, I'm like, oh, it's all in one. I didn't necessarily think about that. So yeah, I mean, there's potential. Like, I think every time I go through a list of potential development permit areas, you start thinking like, oh, every house is going to get developed permit to do. Maybe isn't ideal, but if they can be combined in some way, it's good. That's good.
Well, so if they have an environmental sensitive areas, the DPA and an aquifer protection department. They should.
Sure. When you're done, Fritz, then.
We'll just clarify what you.
Yes, sorry, the aquifer one is about like digging into the ground, but their environmentally sensitive ones include streams as part of their environmentally sensitive area in the stream side area.
So what I noticed in Gibson's that all of Gibson's is an aquifer developed on itself. They have two different parts in there the whole time. And the reason is that for them, it is protecting the aquifer, which means that just what you're saying, you cannot excavate that much that make a hole in the aquifer. So it protects the body of water. It has nothing to do with the recharge because they're recharged way up on the mountain. Right. So I think recharge areas are different from aquifer protection, for instance. Right. So like if you look at the report from what saying, that was pretty clear to me. But and then so it was like the first the watershed, right? That was one as being important to be protected as a whole. That were the recharge areas. And aquifers are not necessarily responding where they are because they're on the ground and it could be kind of they're just there where you're, you know.
Betty?
I was just gonna ask, is it possible to ask the consultants to do an overlay of the conservation mapping that we got from the Wendy Phelan's team and our map so we can actually see like the recharge areas and the biodiversity areas? Would be an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think even given like if I had their GIS data, I should prove.
We have to ask them for it. It's Wendy Phelan,
Yeah. And I know even like I've met a few times with the Conservancy about their work mapping and about the OCP work. And so I had flagged that we have this environmentally sensitive area in our current OCP, potential for updating it.
Yeah.
Like I know there's provincial data, but if they had data too, that that might be something we want to incorporate.
Okay.
But essentially, my experience with development permit areas is like the more we're better able to map it, the more nuanced the mapping show, almost the better.
Yes. Okay.
You've got more?
I don't have more on that topic. I'm happy to move on.
Well, what was the outcome of that? That were interested in doing DPAs or like, what was the point of this discussion?
Maybe just to flag development permit areas. And
Like what they do and what they
Are we
are.
gonna come back to it?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're gonna come back to all of this.
No, but is that what the
Yeah.
takeaway from 4.3 is, that we're gonna do a deep dive into DPA?
You wanted to talk about Gibson engagement posters.
Yes, so this is just a flag that as we look forward in our schedule, once we have, so schedule goes, we have draft OCP document, we can do revisions, they will present to council. There'll be, revisions, but then essentially we're moving into engagement on draft OCP public and aware that as the timeline moves and we found in phase one, we'll end up with quite a compressed probably time to like approve what Matt Clarkey has presented to us potentially. So wanting to flag at this point, okay, what do we want to think about engagement time? So when they come asking for feedback and say, okay, we're thinking about phase two, what do we want to include in phase two? Like we could have an initial thought about what we see as appropriate. And so what we pulled Gibson's phase two, just what we heard report to show, okay, what did they do for phase two? Knowing that may be what McElhaney will initially propose probably as the project they've just completed. And in particular, so when I look at their phase 2, what we heard report, they talk about, some of the things I think we would assume would take place in a phase 2 engagement. So they did an online survey. They obviously they did a mail drop. So they sent postcards to everybody in the community, probably with information about the draft OCP and how to fill out the survey. And let's see what else. They talk about general comments submitted through comment forms and email submissions. So they took responses from people. They did referral comments from key interest holders. So they obviously did, stakeholder, like interest holder meetings, interested parties. And then they did a series of pop-up events. So they did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pop-ups as part of their phase 2. And so I know a topic we had in phase 1 was essentially the idea of, maybe this is covered by interest holders, but you have either community workshops, community open house, community town hall. And as we think about like larger events and sort of gauging from the committee, either at this meeting or just the initial thing to think about is what type of engagement do we want to conduct as part of phase 2.
Sorry, was there an online survey?
There was an online survey.
Okay.
So I think the standard thing that we would expect online survey. We would expect that we will be doing the mail drop for everybody. We'll expect to see, social media posts and then our newsletter posts and whatever else we can. We would expect to receive comments by email for people who want to give more detailed comments. We'd expect to see some sort of events that take place. And almost my big question is sort of appetite for larger, more focused debates. So there's sort of pop up to tell people, here we have a phase 2 of the OCP, we have some boards, we'll tell you high levels, please fill out the survey, which is kind of the phase 1, a lot of it, right? Versus do we want to have sessions where we are inviting bigger discussions?
Yeah, basically having dialogue,
Yeah,
not just input, but actual dialogue in the community.
yeah.
And it'll also be referred to all the committees,
Yeah, I would imagine, refer to committees like we did last time.
And organizations.
I would think so again, like essentially that list we have of people who receive stuff, we would then be going out with the draft to all those committees.
I mean, I think the more engaging you can do, the better, within reason. And I do like the idea of doing a full presentation and that there is a Q&A session. And even if you're using Slido, it makes things a little bit easier to streamline comments. The Slido, if 10 people have the same question, you can kind of see that and you can sort of gather where the mood is of the room.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think having dialogue would make sense at this stage as well.
Not seeing any other questions or comments.
I just went
Spoke
on.
too soon.
Yeah, well, I just went on their website and looked and they actually updated their zoning bylaw as well.
They did both, I know, yeah.
And the excerpt from phase 2 and their engagement posters, that's just your links to us. You don't.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay, good. Ooh, must be 5-4 now. So next is the information items that were included in general distribution to everybody. Fritz, do you want a minute to talk about yours?
Yeah. Yes. This is written, right? And it could, of course, be something more illustrative. But the idea was to make us aware of how all these different aspects that we are reviewing, how they affect each other. And I thought that since I'm on the housing subcommittee, and the transportation as well as environment, I thought, well, to me it became clear, that, and you can write actually the same kind of methods for each criteria. But if you look at housing, and I'm just going to get it up here on my computer. I find it interesting that if you look at housing as not in isolation, but if you say, look at everything, at all the other subcommittees, and see how it relates, then I wrote down housing for all and compare it, how it integrates with the circular economy, community well-being. It's a two-tier zoning, outright permitted or conditional to create small scale work from home spaces arranged around pedestrian friendly neighborhood pockets where kids can play and the car is guest. So I'm just saying is that in principle, providing housing can provide spaces that really provide more community well-being. That's kind of the point, right? What you design makes a huge difference. So that's why the two of them link. Then you take housing for all and the environment and green growth. Environment and green growth will also look at the trail systems, the green corridors, and housing responds to that. Like if you look at the still sketches that you see for new neighborhoods, it tries to draw the nature in, green. And so the parks, the trails, they always respond to or integrate with how you design housing. Transportation as well, because if you take the existing neighborhoods that we have now, it's basically designed for cars to reach single-family lot or with a house, right? If you look at newer neighborhoods, it isn't like that at all. There's a car goes towards the neighborhood, the car slows down, it is in a pedestrian-friendly area, an area that is shared. And all of that can be in the OCP, that somehow the housing and transportation can be discussed at the same time, how they affect each other. And then it's the same obviously it's the same for infrastructure. And but maybe it's interesting I would like it if you'd take the time to read it, because I put actually a fair amount of thought in it. And, if you look at what happens basically, all over the planet, so to speak, with how housing is done and how integrated it is with transportation. Like for instance, if you design housing that is easily connected to a trail system, or it has little pathways that connect to the village and stuff like that, you start with a totally different concept than what is done now, right? And if the OCP allows that, I wrote down a few things, but they're just for snippets from what could be done or what could be discussed. It's a road design slows cars down to a walkable village neighborhood pocket where the car is guest. And this I took from a book, okay, which I really like. The 15-minute city concept recommends that daily walking and cycling trips to school, shopping, services, and play areas should not take longer than 15 minutes. The caregiver of the family, which mostly historically is female, makes many short trips every day, and they're not addressed typically in transportation plans. And this is actually a Canadian couple. They're called the Brunettes, and it's really amazing. They wrote 3 books. The last one is called Women Making Cities. And it is so interesting. The first time I thought about it, that's what gosh, I'm not female. But then I started reading, and it's absolutely amazing because and if you look at the neighborhoods that you're in, if you take the time to understand when they are designed and what the purpose was, it was for men who were designing neighborhoods to give the fastest transportation between work and home. There were 2 destinations, roads were built endlessly to support that particular idea. If you look at before the Second World War, it didn't exist. So it is in 10, 20, 30 years that has taken over the whole planet. And now, if you look at planning, it is completely the other way of doing it. And the interesting thing is that last book, maybe you would want to read it, because it's so interesting. It is women actually that have taken control of that and say, and of course, in theory, it helps everybody, because now there's also more men that have more caregiving jobs. But that's where it came from, that transportation was totally not assessed as being existing. So now the focus when you design neighborhood is to make sure that everybody, kids, caregivers, whoever they are integrated in the transportation system. And it's like conceptually leads to a different world, And so anyway, that should be integrated somehow. Because if we do new neighborhoods, and we still do, but I thought to some degree, you can also get that done in existing neighborhoods. Because if you're in an existing neighborhood and the car is the fastest because you can drive around in a long way and it takes a short time, then if you provide shortcuts, like with little pathways or whatever, then you instigate different forms of living and working, you know, and the social life that comes out of it. So it was that. And that was, but also, you know, they really make you aware of that if you take a road, right, and it has the same width, and it goes to, let's say, the very last house in the cul-de-sac, right? That doesn't need that amount of pavement. The only thing it needs is an emergency vehicle to arrive there. You know what I mean? And then, so for instance, the idea that you can take the existing pavement that you have in existing neighborhoods on Bowen Island, if you start to cut out the asphalt that you don't need, you'd be surprised. Because the idea that a cars always need two lanes is just not true. At certain points, you need only one lane because somebody can wait for a few seconds, right? And that creates that slower walkable neighborhood. So I thought that if, like for instance, if you have an existing neighborhood and people want to have more density, they want to have duplexes, they want fourplexes, then if you take the same concept of amenity zoning, which is basically the same as conservation zoning, that is a form of amenity zoning, and you say, well, okay, yes, you can have more density, but you have to, in your case, we really like to see a little pathway here. So you have to dedicate a little pathway. So maybe your lot get 10% smaller, but it's a huge benefit to the neighborhood, and you can build more smaller units. So then it's the same principle that you use for existing neighborhoods. There's potential in it. And some of these things don't happen. It's gradual. You know what I mean? Like you say, well, like if you take the trail committee, you know, and you say to them from, okay, here's a whole bunch of development. And you have trails here and you have trails there. And here's the village. How would you connect those? They'll give you an answer. And then you can say, well, okay, yes, you can have higher densities in certain areas, but smaller homes, not even maybe not even more square footage, you know what I mean? But we want here a little pathway, and that connects you much faster to the park, or it connects you much faster to, you see what I mean? That's kind of the concept. But in new neighborhoods, of course, it's much easier to start with the, you know, blank piece of paper, right? Sure, with blank screen, you should say.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah,
right. Okay.
Can I just comment to that? I just wanted to say I couldn't agree more with that. My personal experience here is that when we bought a property, to be 15 minutes away from the cove because I was passionate about wanting to walk more. But as our families developed on the island, grown, whatever, my two biggest impediments for walking more is darkness and topography, because we don't have safe pathways to connect. Like it gets too dark at night, like especially, so that's the impediment is, and I think when you said that you could have smaller roads, that would be a perfect example of how you could get more walkable connections to where I live. It is the only connection really is the road, and they repaved it and took off the shoulders, so you can't even, so I couldn't agree more with you. I think that is absolutely, yeah.
Alex, then Kristen.
Yeah. Alex and then Kirsten.
Alex.
I wanted to let you know, David, that there was somebody who had their hand up prior to Fritz that wanted to ask a question on engagement. I believe it was Jim.
Oh,
I posted in the chat.
okay. Thank you, Alex.
Nope.
I will dig into the chat. Kirsten?
I just wanted to agree with Melody and Fritz as well. And I know it was one of the first things we really talked about, I think, as a committee, was just multimodal transportation and making sure that that's available as much as possible on the island, that if we really do prioritize reducing greenhouse gases, if we really do want to enhance engagement in community, making sure that we've got many different ways of transportation and having a dedicated lane that would support pedestrians and cycling and other multimodal options that you have to better connect.
It can be just as simple as putting more pathways within even a small community, like even a small neighborhood, if you get more connectivity, and then you can then at least get that bit more connected, and then as other use path comes in, at least then you can connect to that. But if you need to be bold within the OCP though, because it's been very, from what I see, it's very difficult for the council to prioritize big investment into things like the multi-use space. It's one of those projects that keeps getting bumped and bumped and bumped, so.
Moving on then, we're at question period. There's an opportunity for members of the public, of which we have 3, to ask questions about things we've discussed. And
Well, last time, one of the previous committee was pointed out that I was not asking a question, but I was making comments. So I can either make comments or ask a question. First, and blend them together. But anyway, I'll make a comment and you can imagine the question. I was part of the Forest and Water Management, Bowen Island Forest and Water Management Society in the early 90s. And therefore that society came up because there was a danger that Crownland was going to be logged. Therefore, I come to Fritz's comment and say, do we want to wait until we lie ourselves on the road to prevent logs from coming out of the island and tell the province that we don't want our Crownland to be logged? Or do we do what exactly Daniel is saying? Maybe we should put it into the OCP that the community does not want Crownland to be logged. Therefore, the province can go and think about it. I think this is my question. My second question is regarding exactly about what Fritz just talked about. I was in Thunder Ridge when it was still a work camp. And at this time, the city, the municipality was being planned. And we were all invited to all those meetings where we had nice drawings. And it's exactly what Fritz said. They were planning to have roads all around and trails, pathways, so that ladies can go to the shopping center on the straight line.
please.
My name's Margaret Underhill, some of you know me. I just had a quick comment / question about the discussion about rural reserve and the rural residential with relation to Crown lands. And after attending the Parks Committee meeting last week, it seemed to me, I hope I understood this correctly, that a lot of the park zoning P1 through P4 was to solidify and clarify the role of parklands so that the provincial government's housing legislation, once we reach the magic threshold of 5,000 people, could not be used to attach possible uses to that. So the concept of any mention of residential in the same breath as Crown land is absolutely horrifying. And it goes back to Fritz's point about make the OCP say what we want and let other people fight with us, as opposed to leaving us open to all kinds of other nonsense. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we don't have any. We're almost there. Next item is our next meeting dates. And we have meetings scheduled for February 26th, which is around the receiving the draft. And then March 5th, which is also related to that. Don't have calendar. I haven't seen a calendar invite for the 26th yet. But there's.
Could I make a request for the dates to stay the same, but to make it an earlier meeting, either over lunchtime, like maybe 11:30 to 1:30? Just for those of us who are working, it may be easier to do it over the lunch hours.
Is the room available earlier in the
Check.
day? Thank you, sir. And while
So
Sarah's,
just the date was February the
26th.
26th.
while Sarah's checking, do other people in the group have conflicts on the 26th at noon or 3?
Day of the week.
It's a
So it's
Thursday.
also a
They're both
Thursday.
Thursdays. It's free both days.
Okay, thank you. And
The other people that work on, are these on the line?
Yep.
Oh, is that good for them?
that's what I've asked. I haven't had anybody raise their hand yet. So
I mean, it's fine with me.
Good with me.
that was Alex and Adam both agreeing, is that correct?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, like it doesn't really make a difference between 3 to 5 or 11 to 1:30. So either or is fine.
Right. And Alex, that you were agreeing as well?
Yes, I was agreeing with the time.
Thank you. And Jim, you're back for the 5th, but not the 26th, is that correct? We'll follow up with Jim offline.
And I'll just add, so I think the 26th, I think we haven't settled on the format of that meeting, if it's actually just will be a workshop versus a live stream meeting, but it's sort of to receive the draft OCP for initial impressions. And then I'll just say that myself and our planning team have sort of set aside time that week to follow, specifically thinking about meeting with the subcommittees. So, if the different subcommittees then want to think about meeting in that week between the 26th and the 5th, we're happy to coordinate meetings, at the municipality if that's easier, or online meetings or something to work through aspects and ask questions directly and everything like that, with the idea to coming back on the 5th, where we're able to provide, detailed feedback on the draft. So
thank you. Jim, looks
Sorry,
like you're there.
yeah, sorry, Dave. Yeah, I couldn't get my speaker on. So I apologize for that. Yeah, I am away until I'll still be on Zoom for the next meeting, but I will be back in person on the 5th. You're correct.
Thank you. So then we do have an issue on the 26th, and that Jim and I will both be away. And so, especially if it's workshop, perhaps we don't need a chair, or we don't need either of us to chair.
I think our default then is we have one of the council reps chair the meeting, and especially if I think if it's, if our goal is just more of a workshop to go, initial read through of that is what we're looking at doing.
Do Alex and Allison want to fight that one out, or?
Available.
Thank you. Alex, do you have strong feelings about the 26th then, Chair?
I do. I would like to be there as well.
You'd like to be in the meeting, you'd like to chair?
No, I'd like to be at the meeting, but I don't need a
great.
chair. So long as I can be at the meeting, I'm okay.
You can be at the meeting.
All right.
Thank you. So if I'll hand the imaginary gavel, we will hand the imaginary gavel over for that meeting. We're at the end. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. A lot of good conversation.
Can I just throw?
Allison.
I just dug my OCP out of my binder bag, and I said to myself, no, way back in the beginning. I said, if we want to be recognized as province, as rural, we need rural in our vision statement. Yes. And we don't have rural in our vision statement. Well, that's evidence, but looking at it, it would be very easy to say it's a caring, friendly, rural community.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Good catch.
Any objections?
I thought we went back at the beginning, and we had a whole conversation about that.
We have a purpose for it.
Fine, okay.
It's a lot of work. It's got a purpose.
We're doing the motion for the,
Thank you.
I don't
for everyone.
I don't think we have to have a motion for the draft principles.
No, for the adjournment for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. We will.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. I wasn't quite sure that.
Why can't vote?
You can't really vote.
You can declare the.
Well, I think that helps the group anyway, but thank you all for being here, but we do need a motion to adjourn. All those in favor? You can't vote at it. Adjourn.
Thank you.
That was exactly 2 hours, actually. That's not bad. He's to the minute.
Here's the.
Thank you so much.